Part 1. The affair that shattered everything. 5 years. It had taken 5 years for everything to catch up with me, for the past to catch up with the present. And in those 5 years, I had convinced myself that time could heal all wounds, that distance could erase the memories of my mistakes. I thought I had buried everything in the corner of my mind, where regret couldn't reach. But seeing Ethan again, standing there, in front of me, made everything feel as raw as the day I had destroyed our life together. Ethan, my ex-husband, the man I once thought of as my soulmate, the man I betrayed in the worst possible way. I had known, deep down, that there would come a day when I would have to face him. I had hoped it would never happen. But fate had other plans. The discovery of my affair with Michael had been the breaking point. Ethan had found us. There was no way to explain the unexplainable, no way to undo the devastation I had caused. The truth, that raw, suffocating truth, had finally made its way to the surface. I still remember that moment so clearly, as if it were just yesterday. Ethan had come home unexpectedly, just as Michael and I were tangled in each other's arms. There was no fight, no screaming. Ethan simply stood there, frozen in place, his eyes locked on us, filled with a pain that I had never seen before. His hands trembled as he held the takeout bag he had brought for me. Our dinner. The irony of it all hit me hard in that instant. My heart dropped as I saw the light in his eyes flicker out, like a candle being blown out in an instant. He didn't yell. He didn't rage at me. He didn't even give me the chance to explain. He just stared at me like I was a stranger, someone he had never known, someone he could never recognize. And then, without a word, he turned and walked out of our home. Our home that had once been filled with laughter, with love, with plans for the future. It was the end of everything. I didn't even try to stop him. I didn't have the right to. The divorce came swiftly. There was no argument, no debate. Ethan refused to speak with me. He didn't want to hear my excuses, didn't want to hear me beg for forgiveness. He was done, and I couldn't blame him. After what I had done, how could I expect anything else? How could I ask him to forgive me when I had broken his heart so completely? I signed the divorce papers without a fight. There were tears, but they felt empty. It wasn't sadness. It was guilt. I had destroyed everything we had worked for. Our home, our memories, our love. They were all gone, swept away by a single mistake, and I had no right to claim them back. I left our home, left the town, and ran away to escape the weight of my own guilt. But no matter where I went, I couldn't escape the feeling that I had failed him. I had failed us. The years that followed were a blur. I buried myself in work, in distractions, in anything that could take my mind off the hollow emptiness inside. But no matter how much time passed, no matter how many miles I put between myself and the life I had once known, the guilt never faded. It gnawed at me every day. It consumed me. The affair was a decision I couldn't undo. The lies I told, the trust I shattered, none of it could be fixed. But it wasn't just the affair that haunted me. It was the loss of Ethan. The loss of the person who had loved me unconditionally. The person who had been my rock. The person I had thrown away for a fleeting distraction. In therapy, I tried to make sense of everything. I tried to understand why I had done it, why I had chosen Michael over the man who had been everything to me. But there was no simple answer. The loneliness, the fear of not being enough, the desperate need for validation. I had let those emotions control me, and in the process, I had destroyed the most meaningful relationship of my life. What hurt the most, though, was the realization that I had never truly appreciated Ethan. He had been patient, kind, and supportive. He had given me everything, and yet I had betrayed him. I had taken him for granted, believing that he would always be there, always forgive me. But in the end, it wasn't just about the affair. It was about the love I had lost, the love that was now gone forever, and I would never get it back. Part 2. Rebuilding a broken life. In the aftermath of my marriage, the next few years were the hardest of my life. They were the years where I had to rebuild, not just my life, but my very self. Therapy became my sanctuary. I would sit in those sessions, pouring out my heart, trying to make sense of the wreckage I had created. It was painful, excruciating at times, but it was the only way I could begin to heal. I had to confront my deepest fears. Fears that I had pushed away for years. The fear of not being good enough. The fear of being abandoned. The fear of not measuring up. It wasn't just about the affair anymore. It was about the deep-seated insecurities that had driven me to make that choice. I had wanted something from Michael that I could never get from Ethan, something fleeting and empty, that only left me feeling more lost than before. The guilt was always there, lurking in the background. It was a constant companion, never far away. I would wake up every day with the knowledge that I had destroyed the most important thing in my life. And no matter how many times I told myself that I was working to be a better person, it never seemed to be enough. But there were moments, small moments, where I began to see some light at the end of the tunnel. I began to understand why I had made the choices I did. I began to understand the depth of my loneliness, my fear, and my need for validation. And in those moments of self-reflection, I realized something important. The affair wasn't just about Michael. It wasn't about him at all. It was about me. It was about my own brokenness, my own inability to face the truth about who I was. I thought of Ethan often during these years of therapy. I thought of his kindness, his unwavering support, the way he had always been there for me, even when I didn't deserve it. He had been my everything, and I had thrown it all away for a brief, fleeting escape. And as much as I wanted to tell myself that I had done it for some grand reason, the truth was simpler. I had done it because I was afraid. I had been afraid of being alone, afraid of being unloved, afraid of facing the reality of my own fears and insecurities. Therapy helped me confront these truths, but it didn't fix everything. It didn't erase the damage I had caused. It didn't give me back the years I had wasted. And it didn't bring Ethan back. I remember the first time I had a real breakthrough in therapy. It was a moment when I realized that my own worth didn't come from anyone else. It came from within me. I didn't need someone else to validate me. I didn't need anyone else to make me feel whole. I had to learn to love myself, to forgive myself before I could ever hope to move forward. But even as I worked on rebuilding my life, the pain never truly left. There were nights when I would lie awake, thinking about Ethan, wondering what he was doing, if he had moved on, wondering if he had found happiness without me. And there were moments when I would wonder if I could ever be happy again. Could I ever forgive myself for the pain I had caused him? Could I ever forgive myself for destroying the love we had shared? But no matter how hard I tried to answer those questions, I knew one thing for certain. I had to keep moving forward. I had to keep rebuilding, even if the weight of my past would always be a part of me. Part 3. The wedding invitation. Years passed, and I kept moving forward, doing my best to find peace within myself. But life has a strange way of throwing things back in your path when you least expect it. One day, as I was sifting through a pile of mail, I came across an envelope that made my heart stop. It was a wedding invitation. It was from Sarah, Ethan's closest friend, someone I had once considered family. The name alone was enough to stir up a flood of memories, of dinners we had shared, vacations we had taken, and laughter that now seemed like it belonged to a different life, a life I could never return to. I stared at the invitation for what felt like hours, my hands trembling as I debated whether to open it or not. I had promised myself that I had moved on, that I had let go of everything tied to Ethan. But seeing Sarah's name on the invitation brought everything rushing back. The ache, the regret, the guilt. It was all there, bubbling to the surface. A part of me wanted to throw the invitation away, to bury the past once more. But another part of me, the part that had never truly found closure, knew I had to face it. The location of the wedding was what made my heart drop. The ceremony would be held at the same church where Ethan and I had once exchanged vows, the place where we had promised to love each other forever. The thought of stepping into that church again, seeing all those memories once more, was overwhelming. But something deep within me stirred, a desperate need for closure. I had never apologized to Ethan properly, never had the chance to say goodbye. And this was my only opportunity to do so. I hesitated. I thought about backing out, about returning to the comfort of my life, away from everything I had lost. But in the end, I decided to go. I couldn't let the past haunt me forever. I had to face the consequences of my actions, even if it meant feeling the weight of my mistakes again. Part 4. The church and the first glimpse of Ethan. The church looked exactly as I remembered. The same stained glass windows, casting colorful patterns on the floor, the soft glow of candles that seemed to flicker with a life of their own, the faint scent of aged wood and roses that lingered in the air. Every detail of the place echoed with memories of Ethan. memories of the vows we had exchanged, of the life we had dreamed of building together. As I walked through the doors, my heart pounded in my chest. I couldn't breathe. Every step I took felt like I was walking back in time, into the very moment I had destroyed everything. I looked around nervously, unsure of what I was hoping for. A part of me wanted to see him. A part of me was terrified of seeing him. I scanned the crowd, my eyes darting from one face to another. But it was when I saw him sitting near the front of the church that my heart stopped. Ethan. He looked different, but in a way that made my chest tighten with both longing and regret. He was still the man I had once known, but there was something more to him now. He was older, his hair graying at the temples, his face etched with lines of time and experience. But he still held himself with the same quiet confidence. He was talking to a woman with bright red hair, and the way she laughed at something he said made a pang of jealousy twist in my gut. Her hand lightly brushed his arm, and I couldn't help but wonder if she was the one who had replaced me in his heart. For a moment, I felt like I was invisible, like I didn't belong in that place anymore. My heart ached as I watched them. It wasn't just the jealousy that stung. It was the realization that I had lost him for good. I had made a mistake I couldn't undo, and I was now standing on the outside, looking in on a life I would never be a part of again. I tried to blend into the crowd, hoping that he wouldn't notice me. But fate had other plans. Our eyes met across the room. For a brief moment, it felt as though time stopped. His gaze was steady, but unreadable. There was no anger in his eyes, no warmth. Just a quiet recognition. And then, just as quickly as it had come, the moment passed. He turned back to the woman beside him, and I was left standing there, paralyzed by the weight of everything I had lost. I looked away, unable to bear the sight of him with someone else. My chest was tight, and I had to force myself to focus on the ceremony. But my mind kept drifting back to Ethan, to the man I had once loved and betrayed. I couldn't escape the ache in my heart, the ache that reminded me of everything I had destroyed. Part 5. Confronting the past. The wedding reception had begun, and I lingered near the exit, feeling like a ghost in the room. The soft hum of conversation, the clink of glasses, the laughter of people who had never known the pain of losing everything. They all seemed so distant, so foreign to me. It was as though I no longer belonged to that world. The world of joy, of moving forward. My past was a heavy weight around my shoulders, and no amount of time could lift it. I had come all this way, driven by the need to apologize, to say the things I had never said to Ethan. But now that I was here, now that I saw him in front of me, I didn't know if I was ready for what would come next. The words I had rehearsed in my head for years didn't seem to matter anymore. How could I apologize for something as monumental as destroying the love of my life? How could I make it right? I thought about leaving, slipping out of the back door before anyone noticed me. Before Ethan noticed me, I wanted to escape, to run from the emotions swirling inside me, from the guilt that had never stopped gnawing at my soul. But then, just as I was about to turn, I heard a voice behind me. Clara. I froze. My heart skipped a beat. I turned around slowly, and there he was, Ethan, standing only a few steps away from me, his eyes meeting mine with an unreadable look. He hadn't changed much. The same calm, composed demeanor that I remembered. The same strength that had drawn me to him all those years ago. But there was something different about him now, something more resolved. My chest tightened as I took him in. He looked just as handsome as I remembered, maybe even more so. His dark suit fit him perfectly, and though his hair was touched with more gray, he still carried himself with the same quiet confidence. He was a man who had moved on, who had found his peace while I had been lost in my regret. For a moment, neither of us spoke. The words I had been planning to say felt stuck in my throat, and I could see that Ethan wasn't rushing to say anything either. He just stood there, looking at me. It was the kind of look that said everything and nothing at the same time. I didn't know if I should come, I said, my voice barely a whisper. My eyes searched his face for any sign of the man I had once known, but all I saw was someone who had learned to live without me. He nodded slightly, acknowledging my words, but there was no warmth in his eyes, no flicker of the love that had once been there. It was gone, and I couldn't blame him for it. "How are you?" I asked, my voice sounding hollow even to my own ears. I wanted to ask so many things, but none of them seemed to matter. I wanted to know if he was happy, if he had found someone who made him feel the way I had once made him feel. But the questions were too painful to ask. "I'm doing well," he said, his voice calm but distant. His gaze never wavered, and I couldn't tell what he was thinking. He wasn't the man I had left behind. The person standing before me was someone who had endured, someone who had learned to live without the love I had taken for granted. "I'm glad to hear that," I said, swallowing hard. "I really am." And then, the words I had kept locked inside for so long finally slipped out. "I'm so sorry, Ethan. I don't expect you to forgive me, but I need you to know how deeply sorry I am for everything I've done, for ruining the best thing I've ever had. I was selfish. I wrecked us." There was a long silence. Ethan didn't say anything at first. He just looked at me, his eyes softening for the briefest of moments. And then, in a tone that was almost too quiet to hear, he spoke. "I don't know if I'll ever forgive you, Clara," he said finally, his voice calm but firm. "But I've made peace with it. It took time. A lot of time, but it's in the past now. I've moved on." I felt the words like a punch to the gut. It was the confirmation of what I had feared. He was gone. He had moved on, and I would never be able to undo what I had done. The ache in my chest grew, but I forced myself to hold it together. I had no right to expect anything else from him. I had destroyed him, and I had to accept the consequences. His eyes flicked to the woman with the red hair, who was now laughing near the dance floor, and I felt a sharp pang of jealousy. But I quickly pushed it aside. I had no right to feel that way. I had no claim on him anymore. He had found his peace, and I had to respect that. "I never stopped loving you, Ethan," I whispered, my voice trembling. "But I know I wasn't the person you deserved. I wasn't good enough for you." For a moment, I saw a flicker of something in his eyes. It was fleeting, but it was there. A softness that reminded me of the man I had once known. But just as quickly as it appeared, it vanished, replaced by something harder, something I didn't recognize. "I hope you find what you look for, Clara," he said, his voice steady but distant. "You deserve that, but it won't be with me." And with that, he turned and walked away. I stood there, frozen in place, watching him walk toward the woman with the red hair. A part of me wanted to call out to him, to beg him to stay, to tell him that I had learned from my mistakes. But the truth was, it didn't matter anymore. I had lost him, and nothing I said or did could change that. I had destroyed the best thing I ever had, and no amount of regret could ever make it right.